not the one I wanted. That's the one I wanted. Okay. And we can start recording. Cool, we already are. Perfect. All right. I already saved that, I believe, so I'll pass that off to you. And this will be our code pen for today. So today it's kind of like there's a kind of a mixed pot of what we're going over today. Kind of want to just, I know that you've all looked through training kit. It is accurate of what we're doing today. Also, is my screen size all right for everyone? I'm not quite 100% sure when I do this, or is it like totally off? I'd like to get that down. Cool. All right. Yeah, so I have like this ultra wide monitor and I have to like have these smaller screens on it, and I don't want to like blow out your laptop screen or something with like this like thin sliver. Okay, so today we're going to be going over a few things. The first thing we're going to go over is importing and exporting. I know that this is kind of what we would think of as sort of a remedial thing, but it's also really like in depth. And I noticed that yesterday we had a lot of questions about it, and I'd love to go deeper into this since it's something that we all sort of understand, but I really want to solidify the concepts of it. Then we're going to kind of review compose React components. I think we already almost all know about that. Then I really want to talk about props and using hooks and hook state, passing data with props. And then we're going to talk a little bit about some other different CSS and styling techniques with some cool new things called CSS modules. And then we'll talk about Sass a little bit, but not going to get super deep into it. So the first thing let's talk about is importing and exporting. So, you know, we all know sort of how to import and export a component. So let me come in here. I'm going to create a new component. Let's just call this, oh man, I always just default to my name, but let's just go info. Go info.javascript. And actually, no, let's yeah, we can do that. We'll do that. Okay. So what's the first thing we do ever when we are starting a React component or a new file in React? Yeah, we got to import React, right? Does anyone know why we have to import React? We don't use React anywhere on the page. We got, wouldn't know how to handle JSX. Anyone else got anything? Magic, incantation? The entire React library, 100%. React isn't native to JavaScript, and actually React is just JavaScript, right? React is all written in plain old vanilla JavaScript. So there's a few things. Number one, it wouldn't know how to handle JSX, right? We are seeing a layer of, we're not seeing a layer, I should say, between what we write here and what we see on the page. Let me just open up one second. Where's my Zoom? I'm gonna stop share real quick. Open it up on this. This is just a really basic create React app site page. And let me show you. I'm gonna make that screen a little bit different. So we see when we do anything on Code Sandbox or we write any React app in VS Code, we only mess with the source file, right? What's in here. We don't see what's in here. And let me do this. All right, you're gonna get a quick lesson in what happens. So keep an eye on that file, and look, there'll be a new folder called build. Boom, boom, boom. I just built the production app out of this. And so in here, we are going to see, where is our JavaScript file? There it is. Nope, that's not it. Where's our JavaScript file? Static, JS. Here's our JavaScript files. This is what our browser sees, okay? Our browser sees all, this is it. This is our React app that's gone through what's called Webpack and Babel, and this is actually it right here. Our entire React app, all of our node modules, okay, gets all broken down and built into this very, very, very confusing, unreadable JavaScript file. And this is what our browser reads, all right? You can find little things in here, new function, return this. And so we're not seeing that when we get to, when we just write our code, right? We're not seeing that when we write our app.js, okay? We are just seeing this really pretty, nice looking JSX stuff. So the reason we have to have React in there is because Webpack and Babel have to know that this is a React file, and then it grabs that React library, it plugs the JSX into that, it understands what's going on, and that's why we do that. Little sidetrack, but that's what this deeper exploration is for. Let me go back to my code pen. There we go. So that's why we import React. Pretty cool stuff that, you know, we used to have to do all that Webpack and Babel stuff ourselves, but with Create React App, we have something called React Scripts, and that does it all for us. We didn't used to have to like hand code that stuff, but someone did at one point. Okay, so we import React. I'm going to write a functional component because that's all we're writing now. Let's just go info. I'm not going to give it any props. I'm going to return some basic JSX. Oops, that's weird. Div. Let's go H2. Dan Frehner. H3. City. Jackson, Wyoming. H3. Hometown. Chino, California. Okay, so this is true info about me. Don't go spreading this. Okay, so now that we have a we have a component here. If I want to put that on our main app, what's the first step I need to do with this right now? Not quite import. I need to export it, right? I still need to export this, right? So I'm going to export, and what we've always done, how do we export it? There's a couple of you that have the right answer, but I'd love to see a couple more. Yeah, default. Does anyone know what the default means when we export default? We'll see in a minute. Ah, thank you, Melanie. I love it. And all of you, yes. We don't know what it means, right? It's kind of something we put in. We're just programmed to put that in, right? So let's go look at it. When I export default something, that means that when I import it on the other side, I can call it whatever I want. right? That means that the entire file is being this is the piece that's being exported. Okay, and we're going to go into a couple of different ways we can export in just a second. But coming in here, I'm going to import info from, and then how do I get that that info imported? How do I get that file? If this file is in the same directory, what do I use? Same directory, we use a single dot, remember. So since it's in the same directory, I'm going to use a single dot. That means same directory is the file we're currently in. If this was in a directory above this one, what would I use? Yeah, I'd use 2 dots, right? So keep that in mind. If this was 2 directories above this one, what would I use? Yeah, I'd use 2 dots / 2 dots / right? So really it depends on it's a path. It's a path to where we're looking. Okay, and then I can say info. Do I need to put .js? Yes, no's, maybes. I don't actually, because this Webpack, this React scripts thing is running in a Node environment. We'll learn about Node in a few weeks. Node automatically knows that it's .js files. If you feel comfortable putting .js, you're totally fine. You can absolutely do that. If you don't, if you're comfortable not putting it, don't put it. Either way is fine. So then I'm going to come in here and I'm going to, I don't need the whole thing. I'm going to use that component, right? Is this the entire page here? It's not, actually. It's just this component. Is this the only thing that we're importing right here? But since we're default importing it, we can just say import this from that. So what do you think if I did? Do you think this would work if I plug this into our component here? Absolutely. It works because we're exporting it by default. Okay, that means that this is the default export. We can call it whatever we want. We can import it just straight from that file. Okay, let's go look into something else. We can also export. Let's just go function. Hobbies. Let's go. Well, why? Programming, definitely a hobby. Snowboarding. Mountain biking. A couple of my hobbies. Okay, so what if I wanted to export both of these? How would I do that? Could I come in here and say export default hobbies? Can I do that? Oh, you're gonna see. The screen's giving it away for me. Yeah, we can only default one item from the page. Okay, so we can't export default both of those things, because then when we come in here, it's going to say like, I don't know which one you're talking about. You're supposed to default one item. All right, so what if I do want to export both of these? I can just put export in front of that, all right? I can do that for both of them, actually. I'm only going to do it for hobbies right now, okay? So then, if I'm only exporting hobbies and not default, how do I import that in my index.js file? Yeah, since I am not using a default, I need to wrap this. If I'm importing hobbies, I need to wrap it in curly brackets. This is going to destructure my export, okay? So I can actually export as many items as I want in here. And I also don't have to export default anything. I can simply export info in here. What's the difference between the default and the regular export besides the curly brackets? Yeah, I have to call this hobbies, okay? I can't call this Dan's hobbies. This needs to be accurately named because it's going to go look for the item called hobbies. All right, the default allows us to just throw it out there, say, call it what you want, use it however you want. There it is. The regular export, the single named export, is going to be required to be named. But once I import that, then I can use that however I want. So there's a big difference between the default export and the regular named exports, okay? And this is, these imports and exports are actually, they are just barely becoming a part of the actual JavaScript language. We only have these thanks to Webpack. Webpack is actually going through and doing all the work for us. And so in Node, for example, this is an experimental feature. And we've been using this for years on the front end, thanks to Webpack. Can we export default function? You can, yep. So if you want to do this, you can. Okay, that works. This does not work, however. Const info. If you want to do it like that, if you want to use a const, you have to do it like that. But that's just a little, that's why you'll see most of your default exports at the bottom of the page. Okay, great question, Melanie. Default only exports the first component. Nope, it does not matter the order. Order doesn't matter. It just matters which one you claim is the default. Okay. Yep, you can export default an anonymous arrow function. So let's look at what React is, right? React, if without even looking at the React source code, is this export default or is this a named export? Yeah, it's a default, right? Because we can't call it anything other than React. We could in the grand scheme of JavaScript, but we can't because Webpack is looking for something called React. But we could import it, whatever, like my favorite library, and it would import it correctly for us. So when we go in and we get use state, is this an default export or a named export? Yeah, it's named. So I can't call this whatever I want, right? Well, I can, but I'll show you that in a second. So this is the difference between a named export and a default export, is that essentially the default is going to be the one like main kind of idea that we want to import from that page. The named exports are these kind of smaller pieces, and you very well could, um, you know, export named all of these and not default anything. So what would be the advantages of what the heck? Oh yeah. What would be the advantages of not exporting default? Consistent naming. I think Madison got hit the nail on the head with that one. If we want to enforce our naming conventions, then named exports work really well. If we want to make sure that I can't, like this is called info. I called it Dan's info because it currently has info about me in it. But what if this was just a generic info thing? And I'm going to pass some props into it. Well, I don't want to call that Dan info. I want to call that regular info. And if I want to make sure that, you know, we're not just talking about you working on a project alone. We're talking about you working on a project on a team with possibly dozens, hundreds of developers on it, right? And we want to make sure that when we go through the list here, that we see something, we know exactly what that is. So it is cleaner naming. It is consistent naming. Smaller builds, 100%, Donald. So if we have like maybe 20 little tiny components like that in here, we don't want to bring every single one of them into the file every single time, right? Maybe we only want to use one or two of them, right? So I can bring hobbies in only. Let me go down here and comment that out. And this is only going to import hobbies. And so, yeah, remember when you saw that build, that JavaScript build, that it was massive. But the more we import, the more it's going to import those items into our build. So yeah, perhaps we want to keep it as small as possible, and we only want to import things we need into here. That's another main reason to do it. For the most part, you're going to have one file per component, right? For the most part. And so you can export default that. That's totally fine. And then you're going to probably call it the same name that you called it on the other screen, on the other file. That's totally fine as well. But when you get into these big files that you want to take little pieces out of, you want to have consistent naming, that's when you would use a named export. So any questions on that right now? Named exports are destructured. They're not destructured. We're just calling it destructuring right here, because that's essentially what it's doing. Is, you know, it's an object that's destructured object, because when we regular export, it actually exports an object, and you'll see that a lot in Node. It actually exports an object, and we are destructuring that object and grabbing the names off of it. Okay, so that's what I say when it's destructured. Default would be better for dynamic info. Not quite sure I follow on that. It really is a case-by-case basis of what you are trying to do overall with your file is what you would named or default. You can use named exports for everything. Yep, absolutely, if you want to. Um, not quite, Greg. Default is only going to export, so kind of crazy, but I can do both. Default is only going to export the item that you have asked it to default. Export, a named export, is going to actually, and this is going to get a little confusing, is actually going to export an object with this in it. Okay, so this is our regular export. This is our named export. This is our default. All right. So this is going to take everything we export and put it into an object, and then you can import that object here. That's why we have the destructuring. The default is only going to export the item we asked it to export. That's it. Yeah, once you get the hang of using named exports and default exports, things are, like start to work out really, really well. And you're able to export little pieces of things. If you don't want to export the whole thing, you can export the whole thing and little pieces of things. It works really, really well. Default does not wrap the entire file. Default only exports what you've asked it to export. Just notice there are two, I'm just gonna take that off just for the heck of it right now. There are two components in here. One of them is being exported as a named export. The other is being exported as default. This does not mean, default does not mean that I'm exporting both of those as default. I'm only exporting the one component I have asked it to as default. All right, any other questions on that? Is everyone clear on that? Because, I mean, it does take a little bit of working with, it does take a little getting used to, but I just want to make sure that we're kind of all on the same page, because I want to show you something really cool too. another thing that's going to make it a little bit more confusing, but I don't want it to. I see some typing, so I'm going to give it a moment. Correct, Wes. Yep. Okay. Since there's no other questions, can I rename named exports? Yes or no? We're like 75% no. Oh, we're getting maybe 50% yes and no right now. We got a maybe. Awesome. I don't want this to confuse anyone, but I do want you to understand it when you see it, okay? Because we are going to see it. You can rename named exports. You do that directly in line with the as keyword. So this is saying I'm going to import the named export info, and I'm going to rename it to Dan's info. So now I can actually rename it in line there. What is it? Oh, yeah, because I was defaulting that. That's why. Okay. So you'll see that I am importing info. I'm going to rename it as Dan's info. So we can do that. Why would you want to do that? Okay, I will give you the example that you have probably already seen, and the example that comes to my head first and foremost. You've all used React Router. Ah, boom, Donald got it. You've all used React Router, right? In the older versions of React Router, router was the named import, okay? It was just called router. And then they came out with this new version of React Router that renamed it to browser router. So what happened was everyone that updated, their entire app broke. They had routers sprinkled all through their app and it broke. Okay. But what they could do is put one line in and just say browser router as router, and then their app starts working again. Because now that variable router works, right? So I'm going to copy Donald's page here, and we're going to get, it's going to break on my screen. But imagine that you have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of lines of code, and the old version was that. You're like, cool. Yeah, I'm going to import router, and then I'm going to come and use router all over the place, path, blah, 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 all over the place, right? And then React Router says, never mind, we're going to call it browser router now. And instead of going through and having to replace every single time you've used router, with browser router, you can just do that. And now, router's going to work. They actually renamed it because of the React Router DOM thing. So they have a DOM, they have a native, and they have a generic something or other. So they went and pieced it out. And so that's another thing you had to do was to change it from React Router to React Router DOM. But it's much easier to change that one line than it is to change possibly hundreds and hundreds of lines of code. So that's why you would do that. You're going to see it. It'll happen. You probably won't use it yourself unless you absolutely need to. And most people don't use it unless they absolutely need to. But that's why that happens. Okay. Samantha, I am not a fan of threaded discussions because it doesn't always stay to the thread, and then I end up having to keep track of two different items. So apologies, but it just works much better for me to do it this way. Okay. Any other questions right now about imports and exports? I think we've covered a lot of ground, and I hope that I've cleared some things up. Do some typing. More typing. Let's stay to the topic at hand here for just a moment. And I can post that as many times as we need as well. And we can also pin these things during class and then unpin them after lecture's over. I'll show you that in just a moment, Marcus. You actually have to use another npm command, yarn build, and then it'll actually build your project for you into a production app. But it won't serve it statically, or it won't serve it as your hot reloading once you do that. Okay, let's take a quick break. Any more questions you have, please post them in Slack. I like the fact that we got to dive deeper into those imports and exports, because that's definitely something we would never have time for in a regular class. I did not type that, Greg. That's what automatically typed for me. You can, either way works. All right, see you in 5. All right, come on back, everyone. We will continue on with today's lesson. Actually move that to the side of the screen there. Boom. There we go. Okay, so we've done a little bit of importing, exporting, etc. Don't see any more questions in Slack about it. If you do have any more questions, post them in Slack, DM me, whatever you need to do. Hopefully that was a good primer on the difference between named exports and default exports, and how to work with them. One of those things that you're gonna use a lot in your career, and it becomes easier the more you use it. So let's jump now into props. I'm fairly certain, but I'm going to throw a poll up. One through 5. 1 is I've never used it before. 5 is this is amazing. I'm the best at using props, etc. How comfortable are you using props? Okay, seems that most of us are middle or high end of it, but let's go through this real quick once again. I'm going to go create a new, and once again, we're just going to be following right off of training kit right here. So you can just check it out there if you want the code for this. Also, it's in CodePen. Okay, so let's go export. We're going to default this one because we're only doing the one. And I'm going to return a button that's just going to say, click me. Okay. Oh, I needed to add a function keyword or so it wasn't going to work. There we go. We're going to import button from button.js. We are going to put that on the screen now. Very simple. Got a little click me button going on there. And I'm actually going to just comment those out so we don't have a whole ton of clutter on the screen. I like that a lot, Don. Okay, so let's go into our button here and let's say, does this button currently have props? This is kind of a loaded trick question too, so keep that in mind. I guess it would really come to what you think props are. Does props exist? When I console log props, does that exist? In this aspect of the button right here. Let me just say that it's always going to exist and it's going to be an empty object. Okay, if there are no props, it is just going to be an empty object, right? So there's always going to be a props object passed in, whether there are props or not, right? Just keep that in mind. Whether there are props or not, there's always going to be a props object passed into our functional components, okay? So also another thing to keep in mind is props is always going to be an object, right? Always, always, always going to be an object when we get it, okay? Do we have to call this props? Can we call it anything else? We can call it anything we want, right? But if I say like, if I call it this, nobody's going to know what that is, right? It's the same thing. It is that props object, but nobody's going to know what it is. Okay, so we want to keep it, yeah, we can call it banana for all we want. We can call it anything we want, right? But per convention, we want to call it props because we want to understand what it is. We want developers that are working with our code to understand what it is. So we're going to call it props. Okay, so next thing is, how do I pass a prop to this props? I'm going to come in here, and how do I give that button props? Give it props. And strangely enough, we've been using props this whole time. Yeah, so just like this class name here, you might not realize it, but class name is a prop. Okay, it doesn't come into our props, but it is a prop. All right, so we can do it that exact way. So if I say, I'm just going to say color. I'm going to give it a string of a color. I'm going to give it a random color. I don't know what this color is, but let's go D47F6A. Okay. Now we can see, let's go. Now we can see that our props is still an object, but it has a color key, and the value for that key is the value that we gave it, right? Is a string of that value that we gave it. Oh yeah, dodge it blue. Okay. So how many props can I add? 2 props to a component? Yeah, as many as we want, right? We can add as many props as we want. Of course, I'm going to go with the standard name. Let's go with favorite number. So what if I wanted to put a number here instead of a string? I wanted to put an actual number here. How would I do that? Right, a string is pretty standard because it's a string. Okay, and that's, we know, JSX knows how to deal with strings right out the gate. Yeah, since a number is a JavaScript data primitive type, we're going to have to use JavaScript here. So we're going to use the old open and close curly brackets, and we can now pass an actual number into that, right? So now look, we have 3 items in this props object. We have a color key with that color. We have a name key with my name. We have a favorite number key with an actual number, okay? Can I pass an array in as a prop? Can I pass an object in as a prop? Can I pass a function in as a prop? Can I pass another component in as a prop? Absolutely. I can pass whatever I want in as props, okay? Any JavaScript type I can pass in as a prop, right? So I can give this, so if I was gonna, this is a tricky one, I'm gonna point this out right now just because this always confuses people. If I wanted to pass an object in as a prop, let's look at this. First, I need to give it the curly brackets to tell JSX that this is JavaScript, right? Then, if I want to pass an object in, I need to create the object and put 42. So people get weirded out when they see the double curly brackets here. You have to understand what each of them means. The outermost means that that's JavaScript. The innermost means that this is an object. And we can see in our props object that favorite number is an object itself. And it has a key, a favorite number, and 42. Okay. Any questions on that? Like I said, the passing an object in as a prop is probably the trickiest one that confuses the most people just because it looks weird. See some typing, so I'm going to give it a moment. Ah, yes, you can, Laura. We're going to get there in just a second. Marcus, strings are a primitive data type, but JSX knows how to handle strings right out the gate. Because strings are a part of the HTML reference as well, it can handle strings. It's the only data it can handle without wrapping it in curly brackets. So Neil, we're not going to quite get into that. I think that we get into that with advanced React, render props, things like that. But we're not going to get into that today. Passing another component as prop. Michael, so let's actually jump into it. I'm going to reserve that question for just a minute. Style or reserve name when used as a prop. Because an interpolated string is not a string. An interpolated string is JavaScript, doing JavaScript things to it. Right? The only thing we can pass as a standard string, not a backtick interpolated string. Because JavaScript is doing JavaScript-y things to an interpolated string. Okay. Let's jump in. I'm going to get rid of a couple of these things. And I'm actually going to use some state right now. So I'm going to use state. I'm going to use this hook. And I'm going to pass this string in as our initial state. So don't worry about this right now. Let's focus on the state we've got. Oh. So I'm going to call this button color, and I'm going to call this set button color. So remember, button color is the current state that it's in. Set button color allows us to change that state. Can I change button color? Can I say this? I cannot. The same is why I can't change it like this in a class component, right? Same is true for both of them. Okay, so both of these are no good. No good, either of those. We don't do that, okay? We must use, in the case of a class component, set state. And in the case of a hook's functional state, we must use the function it gives us back when we create that state, okay? So let's come in here. And now let's say I want to pass whatever this button color is state into this button as a prop. What's the first thing I need to do? I'm going to say color equals, and then what's the first thing, the only thing, not the whole thing, just the first thing I need to do. Yeah, so I'm going to do open. I'm going to do an open and a close bracket, right? What does that say? That tells JSX that we are going to pass this JavaScript, okay? if I did this and I said, let's look at our props. Look at that. Color is going to be equal to the string of button color. We don't want that. What we want is an open and close bracket with the variable in there. And now look, color is equal to that, whatever the state is. All right, I'm going to change that state. Let's just go 5F. And now we'll see that that is what our color is. Okay. Any questions on that right now about how I just passed that state into that button? Cool. That's it. That's how you pass state with our hooks into our props. Okay. So let's come on the other side of things. Oh, where's my screen? Let's keep that open just because I want to clear it. And let's use this in this prop. Okay, so we know that in here we have a props object that has a key called color on it. Okay. We'll see that in just a minute, Andy. So I'm going to use the style prop. Michael asked, is style a reserved prop? There's a big difference, and you're gonna find this between a component and a JSX element. Okay, so the big difference is that I can give this something called style if I wanted to, and this is a prop. All right, this doesn't have anything to do with the style of that button. All right, it's got a little confusing. Just like I can call this on click, and this won't do anything. Okay, let's check this out. Oh yeah, get rid of that real quick. We'll see here, doesn't do anything because it's passing that as a prop called on click, right? We see that there's a prop called on click. We can only put things like events and style and class names on JSX elements, not on components. The components will pass that data down as a prop, but it won't take effect until we put that on the element itself. Okay, so that's one thing to keep in mind. There are no such thing as reserved keywords on props other than class and whatever JavaScript reserved keywords we have. Now I'm going to put style in here. Is this, when I put some style in here, is this style going to style that button? So let's look at it. Button, this is a JSX element, right? This is going to be turned into HTML. Style is going to style that button. And what type of style is this going to be? Yeah, it's going to be inline HTML style. We're going to get into some different styles in just a minute. But so when you see two open and closed curly brackets here, what does that mean? Yeah, that means that, remember the outer brackets mean tell JSX that the inner that what's inside of here is going to be JavaScript, and the inner brackets mean a JavaScript object. So if we're going to inline style, this is how we'll inline style. Can I do this in JavaScript? Can I write my style like that? JavaScript does not do hyphens. Okay, so if we are going to write, if we're going to write CSS within our JavaScript like this, we have to camel case it. All right, and then, hey, it works. Okay, so we have to camel case it. Just keep that in mind. JavaScript doesn't do hyphens. It thinks they're trying to subtract two variables from each other. All right. How do we get this button color to be the color of the button there? We have, give us a little bit more room here. We want to put it in our style here. So we know we have a props object. We know that this is JavaScript, right? Because we've given it those outer. So since it's JavaScript, we can just plug JavaScript into it. And there we go. We're getting some styling now. This is probably the most primitive way we can style an element in JavaScript, okay? So just keep that in mind. This is inline styling. Probably the most primitive way we can do this. All right, so we've got that to work, and let's just change that up a little bit. And actually, I'm going to add a couple more styles to it. It's an object, so it has to be comma separated with. And since it's a JavaScript object, this has to be a string. $50 pixels. Okay. Let's save that, and we'll get a little bit of different stuff there. Cool. Highest specificity, 100%. This is as specific as you can possibly get without using important, which we don't use important, remember. Okay. So let's just come in here, and I'm going to change this to be A7. Let's just see our change. Ooh, that looks not great. Green. Okay. Now we can see that our button is reflecting whatever state we have. All right. We're going to talk about some other stuff other than style components, but I love style components now. Okay. So now let's say that when we click this button, we want it to change colors. How do I, first of all, how would I change the color of that button? What would I need to do? Very high level. I would need to change the state, right? I would need to affect the state. I would need to affect what button color equals, right? Because that's what our color is going to be. So let's just write a little function here. It's going to set button color to best color in the world, Audrey Blue. Okay, very simple. All it's going to do is change the color. How do I get button to run change color? Can I do this? Is that something I can do? And those that are saying no, why not? Nope, I mean, I can't. Yeah, so let's talk about the difference, right? We had already talked about this with style. Button is a React component. On click, in that case, is going to be a prop. It is not going to be a click handler on an element. I need to, if I'm going to use it like this, I need to actually put an on-click handler on the JSX element itself. So just keep this as a rule of thumb. Anytime you have a lowercase item that you're putting props into, these are going to affect the JSX. So style, on click, on mouse enter, on mouse leave, any of our events, class name, things like that. If I'm putting it on an uppercase or React component, it's only going to pass it as a prop. Okay, so it's an important distinction to make, that it's not actually going to have the functionality you think it's going to have until you go and put it on there. So instead of calling this onClick, just so I don't confuse myself or future developers or you, I'm just going to call this click handler. I can call it change color if I wanted to. I'm going to call it click handler. So now we are passing a function as a prop, right? Everyone follow me so far? So look at this. We can see our props and button. We have a color, and we have a click handler prop, which has the value of a function. I didn't call this function, right? What happens if I call this function? Anyone know? Yeah, bad things. But it's going to change it to blue right off the bat, and then it's going to re-render it every single time, right? So I don't call that function. I want to wait to call that function until something happens. But I can pass that function down as a prop and use it when I need to on the button. So now, since this is a button, if I put on click here and pass something into here, is this going to work? Am I going to get a console log on the screen now? Yeah, sure does. Because this onClick is an event on a JSX element. Okay, it's a lowercase element, so that's going to be that. So since I have a function already as a prop, I can simply add that function in to our onClick. All right, when I click this, is this going to change colors? Yep, sure did. Because it fired that change color, right? So we put that in as a prop. We see that that function is the exact function in our click handler. I just passed props.click handler in, and then when I click it, I get that desired functionality. All right, so that now is not only reading our state, it's also changing the state by using a click handler. I saw a question that was like, why are we doing this? Why don't we just let the button control its own state? Because this is a completely contrived example, just showing how this works. You would never do it something like this in real life, right? In a professional atmosphere. Hey, I don't control the CSS color scheming, Andy. So I'm just happy that they put Dodger Blue in there. So yeah, this is a completely contrived example, right? We're not going to do this changing a color of a button in real life. This is just allowing us to explore the functionality of these concepts, though. All right, so let's do something weird. And like I said, this is coming directly off the training kit, so feel free to go in and scrutinize it in training kit and look over the code again in training kit. So let's say now that I have a list of colors that this button thinks it should be, okay? This is the only list of colors it thinks it should be. And instead of just allowing it to let its parent change its color, it's going to have a little bit more control of itself changing color. And so what we want is we want to get a colors array. It's going to pass an array back up when we click on change color. It's right in training kit. But yes, I can do that. All of this is coming directly off a training kit, just so you all know. Okay, so we're going to get a colors array. And I can walk you through what's going to happen here. But all this is doing is this is just picking a random item out of the array and setting it to our new button color. Okay, this is just saying math.floor, math.random times the array length. So random is going to be a number between 0 and 1. So it'll be like 0.512 or something. Multiply that by the length of the array, and we're going to floor that. They're just going to give us a random index out of that array, and then we're going to take that color and set it to this color. This is not really what you should be paying attention to. Let's just pay attention to the fact that we're setting a new color based on some data that it's being passed to. All right. So now, if I wanted to pass that list of colors up to that click handler there, do I just go like that? Oh yeah, thank you. Do I do it like that? What happens when I do it like this? I'm really surprised I'm not seeing an infinite loop here. Well, we are, but so no, we're going to wrap this in its own function. And now when I click this, it's going to call this function, right? Which in turn calls that props function and passes it an argument. Now it'll change the colors automatically. All we're doing here, all this is an example of, is passing data back up to this function. Okay, so we're using props to call a function and give it data. That's all we're doing here. All right. Like I said, too, this is inside of there's an example of this in training kit. It's not even automatically. We actually wrote it. So those are all the different colors we have, and it's just picking a random color out of that list. Let's do this. Blue. And now we'll see. Dodge blue. There it is. We can add whatever colors we want to this list. And there's zeros. There's black. Okay, any questions on this right now besides this little part right here? Sure. When we pass this down as a prop, right? We're passing it down as a prop. We can see it right here. Click handler. We can pass data into it. It's expecting to get an array of data, right? And so when we call it, we just pass it an array of data. All we're doing is calling a function right here. It's passing it an array of data, and that function is, so I want everyone to also kind of understand that when JavaScript is run in the browser, it's not seeing two separate files like this, okay? It is seeing one huge, massive file. So don't think that it's like being passed between files and back and forth. The whole file thing is merely for our benefit, okay, as developers. JavaScript in the browser is seeing one massive file. We saw that at the beginning of class today. So it's not like passing it back to another file, right? It's giving an argument to a function. That's all it's doing. It would be the same thing as doing this. It's going to not work, but the same thing as doing that. It's just calling that function and giving it an argument. Now, it just so happens that it's changing state on this this component, but that's, remember, this is, okay, let's think of it this way. If you remember back to your JavaScript time in Web Fundamentals, we learned about the concept of a closure, right? A function has closure. It knows the environment it was created in, called in, okay? So when it set button color, it knows what set button color is because it was created in this environment, in this scope. All right, so when we call it and pass it an array, it knows the environment it was set in and knows what set button color is. That is closure there. I hope that makes more sense and not confusing more. We could put the array colors in the index, absolutely. But the whole purpose of this was to show that we can pass this function some data. Great question, Dave. What's the difference between a component's props and state? If we pass down props, doesn't it become the child component state? It does not, actually. So we got to think of state a little bit differently, too, than when we did it with class components. State, in this case, is a constructed thing that we have built, right? We build the state here. The props are data that was passed to a child component. So this is not our state. We can create state in here if we want. Let's just go const, create some state. It's gonna break on me because I need to include it in here. Okay, we can create state in a component. And we can still have our props, right? So look at this. We're going to have props. And we'll have state. So we have two very different pieces of data here. Props are just data that is passed to a child. State is the state of that component. It is the state that that component exists in, okay? So we can pass component state down as props. So if app has some state, we can pass that data down, but button doesn't know that that's state. It has no idea what that is. It just knows, we can see color. I pass button color and we see here, that's just a string with a hex code for a color in it. It doesn't know that that's app state. Okay, it just knows that's data. Same for change color. It doesn't know what this button doesn't know that what this does inside of here. All it knows is that it's a function and that we can call that function. Nor does app know that button has its own state in here. All right. Now the trick is to getting all of these things to play together the way we want them to. And you know, say I don't want to make this any more difficult or confusing right now, but let's just say we wanted to go click handler and we wanted to pass that state into that click handler, and then it, you know, references it in the index. We can do that. Okay, all we're doing is passing data back and forth. That's it. It's just data. Okay. The state is the state that app exists, that component exists in. If button color is that, and this is, like I said, a contrived example. It's really like just meant to showcase the ability we have to pass data back and forth, but not necessarily meant to be something that we're actually going to use. But the ability to, pass a function down that changes the state on the parent is something we use all the time. Okay, this is, a little funky. I'm not going to lie, but it's just a good example of what we can do. So there's a big difference between state and props, and it's really, really good in your mind to separate those two things. Because they can work well with each other, but they're not. They're completely exclusive of each other. They don't need each other to exist. I hope that explained things a little better and not more confusing. But yeah, it's just they're two very different concepts. Okay, let's take another break. We're going to come back. I'm going to glance over the CSS stuff. You guys already know the CSS stuff, but I'm going to build a little project that uses all of this. So let's take 5, and let's come back and we'll build something cool. All right, come on back. Let's build something cool. I'm going to keep this sandbox, but I'm going to build a new one. Code sandbox.io. And I'm going to introduce a new concept as I'm building this cool thing. Let's come in here. And what we're going to do is we're going to build a modal today. So let's think right now about a couple of things. Let's architect this modal. So we have a modal. Does everyone know what a modal is? If you don't, let's talk about what a modal is. No, I've never heard of a modal. Awesome. So a modal is like when you click on a button and your whole screen goes dark and there's a little one area that you, like maybe a little text box and it says like accept or decline, something like that. It's a pop-up essentially. Doesn't have to be an annoying pop-up. It could be a very informative pop-up. Could be something like really important, right? But it's essentially it's gonna allow us to kind of fade out the rest of the screen and focus our attention on one area of the screen. And we can open it and close it as we like. Okay, does that make sense? Good now? Any more explanation necessary? Let's do this. Bootstrap has modal. Come on, let's go launch demo. There we go, there's a modal, right? See, the rest of the screen is unable to do anything, but you have some important information here. That's a modal. Okay, that's what we're gonna build right here, but without the really cool animations, because we don't got time for that today. Okay, so let's think of a few things. If we wanna build a modal, what are some necessary items that we're gonna need? Anyone just throw anything out there that you can think of? Buttons, okay. Toggle. State. And so any kind of like buttons, div, any of that, any of like the HTML part, I'm gonna put as modal component. We're gonna need a toggle, right? What's that toggle gonna need to do? I mean, just essentially whether, ooh, I don't know how to spell whether. Well, whatever, we're going with it. Or not, modal is open. Okay, right? State to keep track of modal being open. Okay, right? No, let's not go whether or not. Let's go control. Control if modal is open. Close. There it is. Okay, and then the state, we're going to keep track of the modal being open or not, right? So we got essentially three things here we're going to need to create. We need to create a modal component. We're going to need to create some state, and we're going to need to create a toggle. So let's go create this modal component really quick. And so I'm going to create a new file. I'm going to call it modal. I'm going to import React from React. I'm going to export default modal. Give us some props. We're going to need props on this. And then I'm going to return the actual modal. So what I'm going to do right now is I am going to create this modal so that it's always open, okay? So for right now, we're going to go div, and then we're going to do a little h1, and then we're going to say modal open. export default function. Okay, we're going to come back into our app here. We're going to import modal. I can just call it modal, right? I can call it whatever I want since it's a default from modal. And then I'll put it on the screen. There we go. So now we know that our modal is open, okay? Let's just keep it like this for right now, and we'll come back in a minute. All right, so I'm gonna introduce you, and this is part of Training Kit, hopefully you studied Training Kit this morning, to something called CSS modules. So we know we have used styled components before. CSS modules are a different way of styling. That is kind of a mix between, well, I'm not even gonna say a mix between style components and CSS. It is CSS. It is pure CSS that we can import and use on our own. So in here, I'm gonna create a new file called modal.module.css. So we need to say the .module.css in order for this to work, okay? And what this .module is going to do is it's going to allow Create React App and Webpack and Babel to import that CSS and use it where we want to use it. All right. This is merely another tool. Doesn't mean you have to use it like this. It means you can use it. If you're really happy with style components, continue using style components. If you're really happy with less or Sass, continue using that. This is just another tool that we can use. Okay. So in here, I'm going to give it a couple of classes. Modal, let's just call it container. Let's just do that. Modal container for right now. I'm going to write some CSS. I'm going to write this kind of fast because this is not a lesson on CSS. So what I'm going to do is width 100, view width, height 100, view height, display, flex, justify, okay, and let's do a background color. Now, since this is actual CSS, we are going to write actual CSS in here, right? It is a .css file. So I'm going to write actual CSS. And I'm just going to put gray. Boring old gray. Unless anyone's got, who's got a cool CSS color for me? Any named CSS color? I'm going to use that instead. First one wins. No, not besides gray. The gray with an E. Rosemary. Tomato. I'm going to go with rosemary because that was first. And I'm not sure, is that a right? Is that a real CSS color? We'll find out. Okay, so in order to use this, this CSS inside of our React component here, I have to import it. I'm going to import it as styles. Okay, you can import this as anything. And in fact, going back to our lecture earlier, React and Webpack are taking care of this for us, but they are going to import this as a default. Okay, so we can call this whatever we want. I'm going to call it styles. And then we are going to specify module.css where that came from. Okay. Now, if I want to use that, I can just say style, or sorry, class name. Ooh, maybe not. Mobile, I'm going to use this. Okay, that's going to work better. Okay, so let's see. We've got, rosemary must not be a CSS color. Let's go with tomato. Still not working. All right, let's see. Modal container, view width. Oh, yes, thank you. It doesn't need to be a string. It's CSS. There we go. All right. Okay, thank you. And just to see if Rosemary is real, if Rosemary is not real. So I wanted some redemption there, but the redemption was not to happen. Okay, let's just keep it like this. I'm going to add some more CSS. And text. Okay, boom, modal is open. That's the only thing we can see on the page, right? Modal is open. All right. Okay, so you'll see that we, using CSS modules, all we needed to do was to import that file and then use that class name as a key on the styles object, all right? That's how we use these CSS modules. And you can do this for anything, right? We can come in here and create, and we're gonna create a couple more classes in here. This only works for classes though. That's well, we'll see. So we use that class as a class name on the element we want to use it on. All right. Like I said, just another tool in your arsenal. And it's a tool that's gaining a lot of popularity since there is no third-party library you have to import for this. Okay, this is just a standard part of, well, React, great React app right now, but eventually this will be a standard part of CSS as well. All right, and then on here I'm going to add a button. It's going to say close modal. Okay, first part is done. We have our modal. Oh. Sorry, this is just bugging me. We have our modal, we have a close button. We have our modal component built, okay? So that part, done. Now let's go to state. Keep track of modal being open. Where should this state live? Should it live on our app or should it live on our modal? We get mostly apps, but some modals. So let's think about it. If this modal is closed, it is not going to be on the screen, okay? If it's open, it is going to be on the screen, but if it's closed, it's not going to be on the screen. So we want to be able to control that, and I think it should be on the app. Purpose of using CSS modules. It allows us to compartmentalize our CSS. There's makes it cleaner. It allows us to import only the pieces we need, things like that. Like I said, merely a tool, not required by any means. So class name modal hyphen container, we were using it, right? We have to use it in JavaScript, and JavaScript doesn't deal with hyphens. So like I said, use which one works best for you. This is a popular style that's taking hold right now. I personally love style components. I always use style components. That's me, right? It's up to you, and it's up to the company you work for and the team you're on as to what you use. Okay, so I think that our state should be in app, because an app should be controlling whether it's open or not. Okay, and so what I'm going to do is new state, and I'm going to create some modal controls in here. I'm just going to say modal open, set modal open equals equals use state. And I'm going to set it to false at first, right? So there's a couple of different things we can do here, a couple of different ways we can control whether this is open or not. We can pass a prop to modal that says open or not open. And that we can toggle a display none or display flex if we wanted to, okay? We could do that if we wanted to. What's another way we can control whether this was open or not open? Anyone think of any other ways to control whether this is on the screen or not on the screen? So we can use display none on the modal itself, or like Carl said, we can use conditional rendering. So let's just do that for right now, since the app is in play here. And let's go modal open. We'll do modal. Otherwise, no. And now we'll see, why aren't we seeing the modal on the screen? You can short circuit it, yep, but I'm not going to worry about that right this second. We're not seeing the modal on the screen because the state is false. Let's change that to true, and we'll see the modal is on the screen. Okay. Let's add another button in here called open modal. I'm adding some buttons. This could be anything you wanted it to be. It could be like, if you pressed enter something, it popped that modal open. If you hovered over something, it popped that modal open. I'm just going to use buttons because they come pretty well used with a standard click. Okay, so we now have state to keep track of whether our modal is open or not, right? So the final thing we need to create is our toggle. All right, so let's create let's do this. Should our toggle function be on the modal component or the app component? And why should it be on the app if you say it's on the app? It's where we control the conditional rendering, but it's also where our state for that modal is, right? So it's much easier to put that toggle on our state here rather than, have to like go down and bring up a function from the modal itself. We can just throw it right on here, okay? So let's do this. Toggle modal. We're going to give it a function. And then what we're going to, so since we're going to toggle, we need to use, can I do this? Am I allowed to do that? No, right? This is read only. We can only read from the state there. We must use our function here in order to set the set modal open. And then I'm just going to do this for right now, just true. Right, so that's going to change it from false to true. And then on this, I'm going to give this button a click handler, and I'm going to pass toggle modal into it. So now it should work. Boom. All right, so because this is a button, on click is an event, right? This is a JSX element. On click is an event. So this will get run when I click it. And that's just going to set the modal to true. So now, how do we get this modal to close? Yeah, so first of all, I'm going to give it an opposite of modal open, right? So this is going to set the state to whatever the opposite of it currently is, first and foremost. And second, I need to pass this entire function down as a prop to the modal component, right? So let's just call this, we call it toggle modal, that's fine. All right. And in here, where am I going to put a click handler at? Yeah, let's put it on the button, just the same. On click. And now what am I going to pass into that click handler? Nothing. So let's look at our, real quick, let's look at our props. Save that and notice that nothing is appearing right now because our ternary operator is applying null to the screen. But then once I open it, we're going to get our props, and we'll see that toggle modal is a function. Okay, so we're going to have props is the entire object. Toggle modal is the function itself. So I can pass that function into our onClick. And this should work now. Open, close, open, close. So pretty cool, pretty simple, right? We are maintaining state, whether that modal is open or not. We're using a ternary operator there to determine whether it appears on the screen. So if it's open, it'll appear on the screen. If it's not, nothing will appear there. And then we're using a button click on the main screen to open it, essentially. And then we're passing that method or function down to toggle modal. And when we click the button on the modal itself, it changes the state of the app and it makes itself disappear. Okay. Oh yeah, I'll share this with you. Sorry, thought I already had. And that's a pretty simple way of showing how we can control the state on the parent by passing the child a method or a function that does that, okay? Modal doesn't know. Does the modal know if it's open or not? Does this have any concept that the state of the app? Question for you all. Is there any concept this component has of the state of the app, of its parent? No. Does it need to? Nope. All it needs is that it has a click handler that does something when I click it. And that comes from the parent because that's a prop. No, in this case, it doesn't. I can put this wherever, except outside of the div, just because the CSS is position fixed. So it doesn't matter. Any questions on this right now? That's what I got for you today. Love to hear some questions. Essentially, if you were okay with passing state as props with class components, I think this makes it even easier, right? I would do it like this. Let's go RGBA. I'm going to just pick a random color. Oh, that's bad. That's not even in color. Maybe I need to put that around. No, that should be fine. Using CSS modules is becoming popular because we can simply go in and pull the exact CSS we want out of the CSS file. It allows us to modularize our CSS. So let's think about something like in real CSS, we cannot import other CSS files yet. Okay. And so this is allowing us to have a CSS file for each of these little components to be able to pass those around and not have it live on this global CSS scope. All right. So that's why. That's why the modules are becoming popular. The same reason that Sandbox or that style components is becoming popular. Like I said, I prefer style components, but it's up to you and whoever you work for. So keep that in mind. I'm trying to get this to work. I can't. 50? Maybe it's a percentage. I can't figure it out. Okay, that's what I've got for you today. Hex transparency. That's a good one. Let's do that. Any questions? Please post them in Slack. Still not working. Okay. Lambda calculator is the project for today. Previous sandbox was not saved. All right, there you go. Saved, 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 and we're all set. Joseph, you will need a special SAS interpreter, and the ability to do that is in Training Kit. All right, I'll try that out. So you can go check it out in Training Kit, and if you want to use SAS with CSS modules. Something's going on with my CSS here, so that's why it's not working out properly. Okay, Drew. There we go. Beautiful, thank you. All right, everyone. That's what I've got for you today. Have a great day, and I will see you tomorrow morning.